You once loved someone who made you believe you were their entire world, only for them to suddenly retreat in silence, as if you had never existed. That feeling isn't just heartbreak, it's a soul-shattering shock, a wake-up call that reveals the truth behind the dazzling mask they once wore. When a narcissist decides to withdraw from your life, they don't announce it, they don't offer a kind goodbye, and they leave nothing but a cold, confusing emptiness in their wake. These videos are not about blame or seeking revenge. It's about recognition, awakening, and liberation. Together, we'll dive deep into the subtle, yet unmistakable signs that a narcissist is truly done with you, and why that moment, as painful as it may be, marks the beginning of your true freedom. If you've ever felt like you were slowly being erased from someone's life without a word, stay with me until the end of this video. Because what you'll find here isn't just a collection of words. It's a mirror that reflects the truth and allows you to see yourself more clearly than ever before. Don't forget to hit subscribe if content like this matters to your journey of healing and growth. And now, let's begin. When a narcissist gradually withdraws from your life, they don't leave obvious traces. They leave silence. And it is within that silence that you begin to hear the sounds you once ignored. The whisper of your intuition, the echo of unnamed pain, and the quiet cry of your forgotten self-worth. 1. The silent withdrawal and the first signs. You once loved someone who made you believe you were the center of their universe. Until one morning, you woke up in a cold, hollow space and realized it was all an illusion. They're still there, sitting next to you, walking past you, living beside you. But their soul has long since departed. There were no goodbyes, no dramatic signs, just a quiet, paralyzing withdrawal that makes you question your own perception. This isn't just heartbreak, it's a fracture in your sense of reality, a psychological jolt when you realize that the person who once adored you, who once looked at you as if you were their whole world, now sees you as a worn-out object past its use. They don't scream, they don't blame, they don't storm out, they just disappear, little by little. A glance that's no longer warm, a hurried embrace, a conversation that feels like a chore. But you start asking yourself, am I being too sensitive? Am I imagining things? Am I losing my appeal? And that's exactly what the narcissist is best at. They don't need to hurt you outright. All they have to do is withdraw their emotional presence, leaving you to doubt yourself, punish yourself, and try even harder to reclaim the love you once thought was real. But what they gave you, if you look back honestly, how much of it was ever real? They once listened to you with apparent fascination, mirrored your emotions so perfectly, you mistook it for empathy. But now when you speak, they scroll through their phone. When you share joy, they sigh. When you cry, they fall silent. They may still be physically present, but in truth, you've been abandoned within the relationship. And here lies the heartbreaking truth. Narcissists don't love through empathy. They attach through necessity. As long as you serve as supply to their ego, whether it's admiration, submission, or simply being a mirror to their greatness, you're allowed to stay. But once you start making requests, setting boundaries, or living for yourself more than for them, you become a threat. And so they begin to withdraw. No noise, no warning, just you, left in confusion, pain, and a question that loops in your mind. What did I do wrong? But maybe you didn't do anything wrong at all. Maybe you just started to wake up from a dream that was never yours to begin with. 2. The trap of longing and the illusion of hope. You're in love with someone who no longer sees you, and that leads you to do the cruelest thing of all. Doubt yourself. At first, the change is subtle. So subtle you think you're imagining it. They stop responding to messages with warmth. Conversations become short and emotionally flat. The eyes that once glowed with affection now avoid yours. Gestures that once overflowed with love now feel mechanical, distant. And yet, you begin to make excuses for them. Maybe they're just busy. They're probably tired, or I'm just being too sensitive. Then one day you can no longer deny it. Something has shifted. It's not the result of a fight. It's not a clear reason. It's a quiet, growing emptiness between you. And within that void, you begin to feel small, no longer whole. You're no longer heard, no longer seen, no longer cherished the way you once were. A narcissist doesn't sever ties with scissors. They make you bleed through absence. It's a kind of disappearance that leaves you lost within your own relationship. They don't need to say goodbye because they left long ago, quietly, strategically, and leaving you as the last to know. And then you fall into their most insidious trap, hope. You believe that if you try harder, love deeper, be more patient, they'll return to the way they were. You recall the way they once looked at you, the sweet words, the moments that convinced you you were special. You cling to that illusion like a drowning person clutching a drifting log in the middle of the sea. But what you didn't realize is it was never sincere love. It was the idealization phase, a time when they needed you, so they performed. And when that need faded, so did the performance. What you're trying to save isn't real love. It's a role that has already ended. The more you try to bring back their old self, the more you lose your true self. Because every time you lower your standards, you teach yourself to settle for less, to receive less, and to hurt more. That's not love. That's misplaced power. And what you need now is not to win them back. It's to win yourself back. 3, when your worth becomes a tool. A narcissist never loved you with their heart. They loved you through their need. And the moment that need was no longer fulfilled, their love vanished, as if it had never existed at all. This brutal truth is hard to accept because it forces you to question everything that once made you believe the relationship was real. The sweet words, the romantic gestures, the seemingly genuine moments that felt too sincere to be fake. But then you realize they never truly loved the real you. They loved the version of you that could serve their ego. They loved your admiration. They loved the sense of power they felt when you depended on them. They loved the light you shone only because it reflected onto them, making them feel brighter, more special, more important. But what about you? Your pain, your silent loneliness, that was just background noise in the script they had written. When you begin to awaken, when you stop handing out praise unconditionally, when you no longer stay silent in the face of disrespect, when you start prioritizing your own needs, they don't see a person learning to love themselves, they see a threat. Their love was always a transaction, and when you stop agreeing to that unspoken deal, they pull away. The compliments vanish, the tender looks disappear, the closeness evaporates. They grow colder, more distant, making you feel day by day that you no longer hold value in their eyes. But they don't leave right away because narcissists rarely abandon a source of supply too soon. They keep you there as a backup plan. They throw you crumbs of attention, sprinkle in some hollow words, just enough to keep you hooked. But the love is gone. The connection is dead. And you, though still technically in the relationship, have never felt lonelier. That's when it hit you. You weren't rejected because you weren't good enough. You were rejected because you were no longer easy to control. And from that moment, you stand at a crossroads. You can continue to live as a shadow of yourself, trying to salvage a love that was never real. Or you can choose to walk away, not because you stopped loving them, but because you finally started loving yourself more. 4, emotional starvation and psychological collapse. When a narcissist senses that you're no longer under their control, they don't walk away, they perform again, but not out of love, out of conquest. This is one of the most dangerous phases. They return wearing the same face that once captivated you. Suddenly, they become more gentle, more attentive. They ask, "Are you okay?" with the same eyes that once melted your defenses. They bring up old memories in that warm voice that makes you forget the pain they caused. They say the words you once ached to hear, as if they finally understand you. But the truth is, they haven't come back because they regret. They've come back because they feel you truly slipping away. And to a narcissist, your strength, your clarity, your ability to live without them, that's a loss they cannot accept. Because what they want isn't you, it's the feeling of having power over you. In this new performance, they might invent a valid excuse for their previous coldness. They were depressed, overwhelmed with work, or afraid of getting hurt. They might even cry, apologize, and act vulnerable, all to awaken your compassion. They know your weak spots, your heart is soft, and your hope hasn't completely died. And you begin to wonder, maybe this was just a rough patch, maybe this is the challenge we need to grow stronger together. You want to believe the person you once loved is truly coming back, but the truth is, they haven't returned to rebuild. They've returned to reclaim power. This is a love campaign staged like a reenactment, only this time, you're the audience and they're the director. Real love doesn't need a script. It doesn't ask you to forget your wounds just to hold on to beautiful moments. But a narcissist's love survives only through selective memory. They want you to remember the sweetness and forget the cruelty. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself back in the same cycle. Love, hurt, doubt, and love again. But this time, with each spin, you'll lose a piece of your self-respect, a piece of your worth, a piece of who you truly are. You don't need their romantic performance anymore. What you truly need is peace. Real, honest peace that doesn't require pretending. 5, the cruel reversal of roles. When you go silent, they get angry. When you don't react, they lose control. When you stay still, they suddenly show up everywhere, like a shadow you can't shake. Because to a narcissist, your silence is not just emptiness, it's defiance. It's a counterattack without words, and that terrifies them. A narcissist cannot tolerate being forgotten. They cannot accept the idea that you can move on, that you can smile, that you can find joy without them in your life. To them, you're not allowed to discover inner freedom, because if you do, they lose their power. So begins a new phase, the distant monitoring, the quiet but deliberate presence. Maybe you accidentally bump into them at places you used to frequent. Maybe they start interacting on social media with people in your circle. These small touches to your memory, these calculated gestures, are meant to say, I'm still here. I still control your emotions. Each time it happens, there's a sting. A part of you that isn't fully healed still longs to understand, still craves acknowledgement. But the moment you respond, even with a glance, a question, a single reaction, you've handed them back the key they've always wanted: emotional control over you. The truth is, they haven't returned because they love you. They've returned because their wounded ego cannot accept rejection. They've returned because you've stepped out of the cycle they created. And a narcissist cannot bear losing their role as the one in control. These random encounters are no accident. They're tools designed to make you doubt yourself, shake your clarity, and eventually dismantle the boundaries you worked so hard to build. And if you're not grounded, you'll slip back into the old cycle, where you're the giver and they decide when you're worthy of being loved. But this time you're different, because you've known emotional starvation, you survived the cold withdrawal, and you've learned to find light within yourself, not in someone else's eyes. They may show up like ghosts of the past, but you are no longer the same person to be haunted. Your silence is no longer weakness. It's the loudest declaration: I have chosen freedom. 6. They begin to idealize someone new and devalue you. When a narcissist can no longer control you through their presence, they resort to their final tactic: public replacement. They're no longer a lurking shadow behind you. Now they show up with someone new, radiant, confident, overflowing with fake affection, smiling photos, glowing compliments, and sweet, curated moments are paraded like an intentional exhibition, crafted for one audience: you. They don't just want you to know they've moved on. They want you to feel it like a blow. They want you to believe you've been replaced, that what you once tried desperately to preserve is now being given to someone else effortlessly. But this isn't a fresh start in love. This is theater, and you, though absent, are the target audience. This new relationship may not be real at all. Often, it's just a repeat of the honeymoon phase they once used on you. The same tactics, the same charm, the same love bombing, repackaged and pasted onto a new person. Only this time, it's louder, flashier, and deliberately public. Because what they crave isn't the new partner, it's the satisfaction of beating you. You may start to wonder, do they truly love this new person? Is that person better than me? Was it my fault they had to find someone else? But those questions come from a place of unhealed wounds, not from the truth. And the truth is this: the narcissist doesn't love the new person. They're using the new person, just like they once used you. That loved new partner, as glorified as they may seem, is simply walking down the same path you once traveled. First idealized, then drained, then ghosted, and ultimately replaced again. And you who've already walked that road are living proof that the cycle never truly ends. They're not loving deeply, they're performing deeply. And every time they post a picture or utter a romantic phrase, it's not for the new person. It's aimed at you. They want your pain to fuel their pride. But you chafe. You don't need revenge. You don't need comparison. You only need to remember, you're no longer playing that game. They may have someone, but you have something they'll never possess. A heart that has learned to heal itself without needing the hollow applause of anyone else. 7. The cruelest phase of detachment, the disappearance of kindness. When a narcissist has completely severed emotional connection, what's left inside you isn't rage, it's emptiness. They don't scream as they leave. They don't destroy everything like a storm. Instead, they vanish from your emotional space, as if they never existed, without explanation, without a trace of remorse. And it's that silence, that invisible coldness that hurts more than any argument ever could. You start to feel like you're living next to a shadow. They still smile in public, still act friendly with others, still appear to be fine, but when they return to your side, all that's left is indifference. They don't ask about your day, they don't share anything, and they show no interest in your joy or sorrow. Every attempt you make to reconnect crashes into a cold, unyielding wall of silence. And then you begin to doubt yourself. Am I too needy? Have I changed? Am I expecting too much? But the truth is, you haven't changed. They were never truly emotionally connected to begin with. Whatever affection they once showed, if any, was merely a tool to keep you under control. And once you no longer made them feel important, they withdrew, without a word, without closure. Indifference isn't passive. For a narcissist, it's a calculated tactic. They know you're sensitive. They know you're the one who always tried to maintain the bond. And they use that silence as an invisible punishment to confuse you, to make you long for the warmth that once was, and ultimately to make you question your own worth. So you try to make things right. You try to reclaim what was lost, but your words are ignored, your emotions dismissed. And in that cold indifference, you slowly begin to understand something painful yet vital. It's not that you're saying the wrong things. It's that they never intended to listen. That moment, you don't just feel hurt, you feel drained, as if you're in love with someone without a soul, or rather someone who never truly shared their soul with you. But it's in this very pain that clarity begins to surface. You begin to reach the breaking point of endurance, where you no longer try to make them understand. Instead, you begin to understand yourself. And from that realization, the emotional detox begins, slow, painful, but undeniably the first step toward genuine healing and rebirth. 8. The quiet preparation for the final goodbye. Emotional detox is not a one-way journey. It doesn't begin with a bold final decision, but with thousands of quiet moments. Moments where you pause in the middle of longing, in the middle of anger, in the hollow ache of disappointment, and whisper to yourself, I deserve more peace than this. After all the manipulation, blame shifting, withdrawal, and neglect, you're no longer furious like you once were. Your emotions have transformed into something else. Exhaustion. Not because you're weak, but because you've held on too long in a silent war. One where you were the only one fighting for something once called love. You begin to realize they won't change. They won't suddenly see your worth. They won't wake up and become the person who once made you believe you were loved, because that person maybe never truly existed. This is the moment you stop and turn inward. You stop searching for explanations. You stop writing those long messages you know will never be read with an open heart. You stop rehearsing imaginary conversations where they finally admit you were worth it, because now you understand. Validation cannot come from the one who once denied your worth. It has to come from you. From here, you slowly begin to heal. You allow yourself to grieve without calling it weakness. You allow yourself to feel anger without shame. You begin to recognize your emotional triggers, a song, a photo, a familiar street. But instead of letting them consume you, you take a deep breath and keep walking. You start choosing people who don't manipulate you. You rediscover the things you once loved but abandoned for the sake of that relationship. You care for your body not to be more attractive, but because it is the sacred home of your soul. Read through old journal entries and clearly see how far you've come. And most importantly, you learn to forgive yourself for loving deeply, for not leaving sooner, for believing in something that wasn't real. Forgiveness, not to forget, but to be free. Emotional detox isn't just cutting off contact with them. It's reconnecting with yourself. It's a journey that needs no one's approval, only your decision to begin, and you are doing it. 9. The departure and the aftershock. They come back not because they've changed, but because they can't handle the fact that you have. The narcissist realizes you're no longer hurting, no longer clinging, no longer placing them at the center of your emotional world. They don't celebrate your healing. They don't quietly disappear. They return. But this time, there's no drama, no spectacle. They return with carefully crafted performances, veiled in kindness, regret, and even a more mature version of themselves. They text you after months of silence with something as simple as, I randomly heard that old song and thought of you. They watch your stories as if nothing ever happened. They ask about you through mutual friends or send an old photo you once cherished. Subtle, familiar signals, just enough to stir your memory, to shift your thoughts. Not because they miss you, but because they want to know, do you still belong to them? To the narcissist, your rebirth is a threat, essential, because if you're truly thriving without them, it means they weren't as essential as they believed, and their ego cannot withstand that truth. So they don't return to repair, they return to disrupt what you've worked so hard to rebuild. Your peace. And this is the most crucial test of your healing journey, not the moment of your deepest pain, but the moment when you're calm enough not to react. You know all too well, if you respond, they'll step back in. The first gently, sweetly, pretending they've changed. But soon it will all repeat. They'll test your boundaries, test your emotions, tear at the fragile thread you've been carefully tying between your heart and your self-respect. So this time, you don't answer. You don't need to be the bigger person by maintaining polite connection. You don't need to prove you're not bitter. You only need to protect the light you've just rediscovered. And you now understand. Someone who once drained you in the name of love should never be allowed back just to check if you've healed. Your silence now is no longer a reaction. It's a declaration. You're not cold. You just refuse to relive the tragedy. You're not cruel. You're simply choosing to love yourself the right way. They may return, but this time all they'll find is a firmly closed door, and behind it, someone who no longer needs their validation to feel whole. 10. The healing journey from victim to intentional survivor. At last, you no longer need them to recognize your worth, because you've seen it for yourself clearly, fully, and undeniably. They used to be the center of your universe. Every emotion, every decision, every effort revolved around keeping them, understanding them, loving them enough. But now, you no longer stand at the center of that relationship trying to adjust everything to fit them. You've stepped out. And in stepping out, you've realized you don't need to win a battle you never chose to fight. You don't need their apology. You don't need their regret. You don't need their admission of guilt. Because you no longer live in the story they wrote. You're living in your own story, one built with awareness, self-respect, and love that no longer depends on anyone else. When you stop trying to explain your pain to the one who caused it, you begin to hear a new voice, your own. And it doesn't scold. It gently reminds you you've always been enough. And when you rise, not for revenge, not to prove a point, but simply to move forward, that is the most powerful act of all. The narcissist may twist the narrative, rewrite the past, invent reasons, and shift blame. But they can never touch the light you discover, since leaving the shadows they created. The truth is, no one can make you feel small if you no longer view yourself through their eyes. No one can make you feel unworthy once you realize that value is not found in being kept, but in having the courage to walk away. They may tell others you've changed. They may call you cold, stubborn, or too sensitive. But what they won't say, what they likely can't even admit to themselves, is that you've grown, you've outgrown them, you've chosen freedom while they remain trapped in the same cycle of control and pretense. The final truth doesn't need to be spoken aloud. It reveals itself through the peace you now carry, through eyes that no longer tremble, but through steps that no longer hesitate, through the laughter you've reclaimed in solitude that is no longer lonely. You didn't defeat them, because you simply stopped playing the game, and that quiet retreat with dignity is the most beautiful victory you could ever give yourself. 11. The rebirth phase. When you no longer want to go back. When a narcissist leaves, the pain doesn't come from the departure itself. It comes from the absence of a goodbye. There's no clear ending, no explanation, no apology, no farewell hug, no final glance. Just you, standing in the numb silence, trying to piece together the fragments of something you never even broke. You're left haunted by the question, was any of it ever real? And while you're still trying to make sense of it, they're already smiling next to someone new, telling friends it's all in the past, and erasing your name from their life as if you never existed. But here's what you must understand. You weren't abandoned because you weren't enough. You were left behind because you were waking up. You started asking questions. You began to see the toxic patterns. You became harder to control. You dared to say no. You dared to protect your boundaries. You stopped feeding their bottomless ego with your endless energy. And for that, they lost interest. They didn't walk away because they stopped loving you. They left because you stopped letting them manipulate you. But the pain doesn't end when they vanish. What wounds you most deeply is the sense that everything you gave, your love, your patience, your trust, was rendered meaningless. You didn't just lose a relationship, you lost the story you once believed was true. And that's when you begin to rewrite yourself. You learn that you don't need a beautiful ending to move forward. You don't need closure from someone who denied your existence. You realize that healing doesn't come from understanding why they did what they did. It comes from facing your wounds and saying, even without a goodbye, I still have the right to live fully. And in that silence, you begin to hear yourself again. The voice that was once drowned out by their sweet but hollow words. The intuition that was clouded by your idealization. The self-worth that was traded for validation from someone unworthy. You no longer need them to come back to feel worthy. You only need to look at who you are today, strong enough to stand, gentle enough to heal. And that's something they'll never understand. That you don't need someone to affirm your value because you are the living proof of rebirth after ruin. 12. Reclaiming your identity. Who are you without the manipulation? One day you'll wake up and realize you no longer think of them the way you used to. And that realization won't hurt. It will bring relief. Not because you've forgotten everything, but because you've stopped holding on to the things that once left your heart in chaos. The things that once reminded you of them, a song, a familiar cafe corner, an old phrase, no longer pierce you like sharp needles. They still exist, but you have changed. The truth is, healing doesn't arrive like a crashing wave. It comes like a quiet tide, gently washing away the things that once caused you pain, leaving behind the smooth sand of acceptance. You no longer ask where they are, what they're doing, or whether they still think of you, because now what matters most is how are you living? Are you being true to yourself? Are you at peace? You begin to fall in love with life again, but this time not to prove a point. You do it to reward yourself for surviving the darkness of manipulation. You walk without needing a hand to hold. You smile without needing someone to give you a reason. You say no without fearing abandonment. You choose what makes you happy, not what makes others comfortable. Freedom doesn't come from no longer loving someone. It comes from no longer losing yourself just to be loved. And then one day you'll encounter them again, maybe in real life, or maybe just as a fleeting image in your mind. But your heart won't clench anymore. Instead, you'll feel gratitude, not because they were good to you, but because through them, you were forced to learn how to love yourself so deeply that no one could ever take that from you again. You'll understand this. You were not the person they walked away from. You were the person they could no longer control. And that's why they disappeared. Now you're no longer the one begging for love. You are the one creating love from within. No one gives you wholeness. You chose to live whole even after being broken. You don't go back to the old path. You don't look at it as an unfinished ending because now you understand. A toxic story doesn't need a beautiful conclusion. It just needs to end. And you were brave enough to walk away. From the ruins, you rebuilt yourself. Not to become a better version of someone else, but to become the truest version of you. 13. Rebuilding self-worth, not through confrontation, but through nurturing. After everything, you don't return to who you once were. You become someone new, calmer, wiser, no longer easily shaken by a look or a sweet promise. You no longer see the past as a stain. You see it as a part of the journey that shaped your being. No one chooses suffering, but when suffering finds you and you survive, you don't remain a victim. You become a creator. You rebuild yourself piece by piece on the foundation of awareness, not illusion. You begin walking with steadier steps, not because someone is watching, not to chase someone who turned away. Each step is a quiet declaration. I don't need to be rescued. I rescued myself. When you see your former partner in a new relationship, it doesn't sting anymore. There is no more anger because now you know you don't need to win. You just needed to be free. And the freedom you have today, a peaceful mind, a heart no longer pulled by strings, is something they can never take back, no matter how they return or beg. Now you no longer search for love. You are love. You don't need to be validated by fancy words. Because every morning you wake up and choose kindness, choose not to seek revenge, choose to keep growing. That is all the proof of how strong and lovable you truly are. No one holds power over you anymore, not through their presence, nor their absence. Their disappearance doesn't collapse your world, because your world is now built upon your inner truth. Solid as stone, gentle as water, radiant like light after the storm. You don't need closure. You wrote your own ending. An ending without tears, without confrontations, without exposing or blaming. Just peaceful silence. And that silence isn't empty. It's a space where you can finally hear yourself after living too long in the noise of manipulation and fear. Now you live a life where you no longer shrink to make others comfortable. You speak truthfully, live authentically, and love wholeheartedly. And those who can't walk beside you on that path, let them go. No drama, no resentment, just this truth. You no longer have room in your soul for those who don't know how to cherish what is precious. 14. Letting go of unanswered questions because you don't need their answers to move on. One day you'll tell your story, not with a trembling voice, but with a steady one. Not to seek pity, but to empower others. You once believed healing was the final destination, but now you understand it's just a transition. Because after healing, you don't just rise for yourself, you become a light for others, still wandering in the dark. Those who, like you once did, believe that silence was their fault, who waited for the one who hurt them to return and rescue them. Now you don't say forgive them, you say release yourself. Release yourself for staying too long, for hoping too much, for putting someone else above your own self. Forgive yourself for what you didn't know, for not leaving sooner when you should have. You no longer speak of the narcissist with hatred, and you speak of them as a part of your past, a bitter but necessary lesson. You'll not let them define your worth, and even more importantly, you'll let them decide how you'll love again. You reclaim that love and plant it where it belongs, within yourself and in the hearts still waiting to be awakened. True recovery isn't just about standing tall, it's about having the courage to lift others without losing yourself again. You don't need a powerful speech. The way you live, honestly, freely, and compassionately, is already a powerful testimony that people can rise from toxic relationships and still carry a warm, unbroken heart. And when someone new comes into your life, this time you won't love them out of fear of losing them. You'll love with clarity and conscious choice. You don't need them to complete you. You are already whole from within. If they don't know how to treasure you, you won't cling. If they lack kindness, you won't make excuses. Because now you know your presence is a gift, not a debt. That's the moment you step into a new life, not to escape the past, but to fully embrace the present. No longer striving to prove anything, just simply existing as you are. And that is enough. 15. Welcoming a new chapter. You are the one who continues writing your story. You don't need to close the previous chapter with a question mark. You only need to move forward with a bold, definitive period, because in the end, you no longer live to please others, no longer love just to be kept, no longer speak words that make others comfortable while you yourself are slowly fading. Your new life holds no pretense, knows only truth, and that truth is, you've come home to yourself. You are not who they once claimed you were. Not weak, not too sensitive, not too much. You simply gave your heart to the wrong hands, and now you've taken it back, fully unbroken. You don't need everyone to understand why you cut ties. You don't need their agreement for walking away. You don't need applause to feel whole, because you know, every step you take, even in silence, is a declaration to the universe that you will no longer compromise with pain. They may keep telling their version of the story, painting it prettier, shifting blame to preserve their image. But you don't need to explain. I don't need to defect. They don't need to clean up what they've intentionally left in chaos. Because now you live with clarity, both in your mind and your soul. And the most beautiful part, you haven't closed yourself off. You're still loved. You still believe. But this time, you love with eyes cleansed by tears. You believe with a heart stitched together by your own hands. You're not waiting to be rescued. You simply need someone who walks in with honesty, kindness, and patience. And if that doesn't come, you're still okay. Your rebirth isn't allowed, but it is radiant, like a flame once extinguished, now quietly burning again. Not to scorch anyone, but to warm yourself. And if that light happens to shine on someone else along the way, that's a gift, not a goal. No one can take that light from you anymore, because it no longer depends on someone's gaze or praise. It comes from within. From the moment you dared to face the truth, confront the pain, walk through abandonment, and choose to stay with yourself. You didn't just survive, you lived truly, and that's something a narcissist will never be able to. In the end, you don't need closure from them. What you truly need is a blessing from yourself. Congratulations, you've come home. Home from a place that once seemed like love, but revealed itself to be manipulation. Home from countless days tormented by the question, what did I do wrong? Home from the sleepless nights where you willingly laid your heart down for someone to trample just because you believed that if you were good enough, they would change. But today, you no longer seek changes from them. You're not waiting for an apology, a final conversation, or a parting embrace. Because now you understand, not all relationships need to end with reconciliation. Some end with your growth. You are no longer the one who begs for love through self-sacrifice. You are the one who walks away with wisdom and compassion for yourself. You no longer react to coldness, nor get pulled into the endless cycle of love, pain, forgiveness, and pain again. You choose stillness. And from that stillness, you begin to rebuild a world where peace cannot be threatened by anyone. You have survived, you have healed, and more importantly, you have awakened. This journey has not been easy, but you don't have to walk it alone. Millions of others out there are facing the same fractures, and if today's message touches something deep in your heart, leave a small sign, whether it's a subscription, a like, or a sincere comment, because maybe, just maybe, you will be the light for someone else who's just beginning the path you've already walked. On this channel, we don't tell stories to reopen wounds. We tell them to transform pain into power, to remind you that you are not alone, you are not weak, and you are not too sensitive. You are simply learning to see clearly who is truly worthy of your heart and who only sought to use it. So, if these words resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and walk with us on this journey of healing. Every video is a doorway, bringing you closer to yourself and further away from what once kept you in the dark. Remember this. You don't need anyone else to validate your worth. You are living proof that from brokenness, beauty can still bloom. And that light within you, as long as you hold on to it, can never be extinguished.